Hello, my name is Adam Barlow-Thompson, and I'm with my colleague, Maddie Johnson, and we are from the Neighboring Movement. We're here to share a little bit about the concepts of asset-based community development and how they can be used in local churches. And so we have some slides that we're going to run through, and we'll share some examples and stories and concepts with you during this video. So the first one is just an introduction to asset-based community development, which we shorten and say ABCD because that's a long phrase to get out. So ABCD, or asset-based community development, is a model discovered by John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann. It's been used by communities all over the world to help develop community strength from the inside out. And it starts with the assumption that everyone has gifts or assets. ABCD is really about, is nurtured through relationships of individuals and communities, and then discovering the gifts that are there and connecting them so that those people know whose gifts are available and how they could be used, and eventually mobilizing them to create pathways towards organizing groups for common good. And so that's kind of an overview of ABCD.
So as Adam mentioned, ABCD is a philosophy and understanding that so many people across the globe are invested in. And that being said, ABCD is not value neutral. And it's helpful to remember that as we learn and kind of dive deeper into what this is all about, that we start with what ABCD is and is not. And so, as Adam mentioned, one of the primary values of ABCD is that we start with the gifts. And in our relationship building, that second bullet point is that our relationships are for mutual support. And so reciprocity and mutuality is a key tenet in all that ABCD is. Our efforts are small, grassroots, and community driven. And everything we do when it comes to asset-based community development ultimately nurtures community member-led action. And so making sure that the places that we are in and the neighborhoods and communities we're invested in, the leadership is reflected in those neighborhood and community members. This work is, and it has an end goal of equity and justice, and we believe in possibilities when it comes to ABCD because we're starting with those gifts. We are able to uncover them and then just keep building upon the possibilities that those gifts present. When it comes to leadership, ABCD leads by stepping back, which means in our efforts to that last bullet point, which is include everyone, we make sure that to do so, we step back and make sure everyone has a seat at the table. And if there's any reason someone's not at the table, that we bring them in. And so these are some of the key values of what it means to do asset-based community development.
We often think of ABCD in comparison to the way things that we've been doing it. In our churches, we've been trained, most of us, in a needs-based approach. That's how I was trained to be a pastor, and Maddie was trained to be a pastor. And I want to emphasize that no one has bad intentions. If you see yourself or you see your church's ministries and you say, oh man, we've been doing needs-based approach, nobody thinks that you're out there trying to do harm. We just understand that that's how we've been trained and we want to help our communities. And so we use the best tools that we have. ABCD challenges some of the assumptions that come with needs-based approach. And I encourage you, as you look at this slide, to think of the ministries in your church and think how they could shift from maybe a needs-based approach to an asset-based approach. So the first one is needs-based approach starts with scarcity. So we look for what we don't have, or start with needs. And in an ABCD approach, we shift that focus to the abundance, where we say, what is it that we already have? So instead of starting with what's wrong, we start with what's strong. In needs-based approach, we often focus on individuals and we respond to the problems that those individuals have. And so think of just like a food pantry, right? Like we're going to focus on the individual and feeding that individual person. Versus in an ABCD approach, we focus on community and we build from opportunity. And so in ABCD approaches, we, instead of focusing just on an individual, we focus on how does the community feed itself, and what opportunities and gifts and interests do the people who are a part of that community have that could help us work towards matching a gift with a gap. The power comes from programs and requires money in needs-based approach. Almost all of the ministries that I led as a pastor required a budget and financial requirements. In ABCD approach, we have again and again seen that people who do this method always come back and say, it didn't take as much money as we thought, because what they find is that they're using what's already there. They don't have to go out and spend financial resources to create something. That power is built with relationship then, and requires trust so that people feel like they are able to feel safe and that they can be counted on, and that they can count on each other when they're doing ABCD approaches.
So now we get into what are the assets in your community. And when it comes to ABCD, there are typically 6 categories that we can focus on that really help just identify what those gifts are. So I'll start in the kind of top left with individual gifts. And between this one and the next one, I'll share like these are really like the heart of what it means to do this work, because it's about relationship and really being able to build from the opportunities of those relationship and gifts. So individual gifts are, what are the things that people are passionate about? What do they love? What do they do? What are their hobbies? And that is really that category. What are the we categorize it as like gifts of the head, hands, and heart that individuals have. That next one just below it are associations. And these are the very informal, sometimes formal clubs or activities that you might find yourself a part of. So they could be anything from a Scouts club, Lions club, to as informal as a walking group that meets once a month. And so the important part of what makes an association is that everyone who is a part of this association is volunteering their time and their efforts and their energy. And so these are the informal or formal clubs and connections we have in the community. And we see those as a real asset because those are all about relationship and connection. The third category is exchange, also sometimes known as local economy. And these are the assets in your community that pour into the kind of financial health of your neighborhood. And so this could be, small businesses, mom and pop shops. It could also be somebody who has a business out of their home, something they're doing kind of on the side. It could also be as informal as a neighbor saying, hey, I need to go to the store. Will you watch my kid while I do that? And so what are the exchanges and kind of the economy that shapes this particular area? The fourth one is stories, or sometimes called culture. And these are the assets that really, there are storytellers in your community who are able to name what has shaped and impacted this space. And there are also just events and stories that have happened in your communities that really describe who these people are and where they might be headed. And so we really see stories as a huge asset to understanding the uniqueness that certain neighborhoods and areas have. That fifth category is the physical assets, and this can be the nature, things like the parks or rivers or all of those natural assets that your community might have. It can also be things that maybe on the surface don't always look like an asset, like, for example, an abandoned lot or a vacated building. What some folks in the ABCD community like to see those as is an asset in waiting. And so what are the kind of physical assets and spaces in your community that might be identified? And then the last category is institutions. And we intentionally list this one last because we find so often that this is the first thing that people often go to when it comes to identifying the assets of a particular community. And there is nothing wrong with institutions. There are incredible things institutions are. We have hospitals, we have certain corporations and governmental entities that make up our community. However, if you're the only association you have with an institution is that you Google it and know it's there, that's typically not about relationship. And so that's why with an ABCD approach, it's always helpful to, again, emphasize and prioritize those relationships and connections you have with the assets in your community. And for things like institutions, what might it mean to have an asset-based connection with them, which would be about relationship building and figuring out who those people are that make up those institutional assets.
Yeah,
So those
and
are all,
Maddie,
yeah.
on this slide, we often get a couple, there's a couple questions that come to mind that people ask often. So one of them is, well, what is my church then? Like, what category is my church in? And it's actually kind of interesting because the church actually has all of these categories as a part of its life. And it gives me a sense of hope, actually, because it makes it, I think the church is in a unique position to impact its community because it really does reach across all of these categories. It is an institution. The church, especially if you're connected to a denomination, if your church has staff, those are institutional kind of pieces. It's full of individuals. They make up associations. I guarantee that every church has a group of volunteers who gathers without anybody directing them to do so, because they just are motivated by their faith to do that kind of work. They give and take in exchange of all sorts of things in their community. We literally tell stories every single week, at least on Sundays, much more than that too, right? And most churches have some physical space where they contribute to the community too. So I really think that the church is in a unique position in a community to impact the people around them by curating and kind of convening assets for the community. And that's what I hope you will take from ABCD as a person of faith as well, if you're watching this video.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we encourage people to do, especially in a faith-based setting, is to focus in on the individual gifts and associations that people have. Those are the hidden gifts. They're the ones that are harder to find. And what we've created is just kind of a little cheat sheet on how to do that. We call them learning conversations. Other settings, you might hear that as just like a one-on-one. It's just a conversation that you have with someone. And we've created some prompts using a method that's developed within the ABCD community of head, hands, heart, and we added spirit. And you can see that these questions just help people get talking, and most people don't normally brag about themselves easily. There are a few of us who love just to brag all the time, Maddie and I, obviously. But the head, hands, and heart are just a way of get the conversation going. So gift of the head, what's something you know so well you could teach someone else? Gift of the hands, what's something that you can make or build or do with your hands? Gift of the heart, which is what is something you're so passionate about that it's moved you to action, or even just what is something you love or a group of people that you love. Gift of the spirit, what is a thing or an event that you've been through in your life that you've learned from, that then you can share that experience for those who might be going through a similar time. And so all of these questions help us identify gifts of an individual. Often in this conversation, you discover the types of associations that these people have as well, and very quickly can fill out that part of that pie graph for individuals and associations. This is an activity that can be done with anybody. My wife and I led a group of third and fourth graders through this last week, and they killed it. They loved it. They were so excited to share their gifts. When we said, okay, now let's imagine how we could use these, they all had ideas of how they could then use those gifts in the world to better their communities. And so we encourage you to try this with a Sunday school class or your administrative council or your leadership team at your church, to spend time interviewing each other about the head, hands, hearts, and identifying the individual gifts and associations that you have in your church community.
And we also have a facilitator's guide for this group activity to be able to do it with a larger group. And so that's an option as well.
Yeah.
So as Adam shared, the first step of ABCD is identifying those gifts. And then once you've done that, we move to the second step, which is to connect those gifts. And this is, as Adam lifted up, a really unique opportunity for church people and really the church at large to kind of reconsider maybe what their role has been and what it could be from an ABCD perspective. So the left side of this slide, you can see what the church traditionally has and maybe currently is. And there is nothing wrong with the left side. Again, we're considering maybe another role or opportunity with the right side. So I'm just going to go through these three. So typically the church has seen itself as the first one is the role of proselytizer. And this is making sure we've converted as many people as possible. That maybe translates to making sure that people are walking into the church building on Sunday mornings. We've worked in church for a long time. Totally makes sense. We understand why that is a driver for us.
You're told, if you're part of a church, you're always told that you have to grow numerically. Right. And if you don't, there's a lot of messages of shame and guilt that actually go with that. So yeah, understand why people would do that.
With ABCD, because our emphasis is relationship building, sometimes when you have an agenda of making sure you grow and bring people into your church building, it can sometimes compromise the efforts of relationship building. And so that's the kind of tension that we see in ABCD for that first role of proselytizer. So that is not what ABCD is about. The second one we see is service provider. And again, nothing wrong with that. In so many ways, the church as a service provider is an integral part of the community and one of the assets within your community. Some of the tension we see, though, around being a service provider is that it, again, focuses from a needs-based perspective, when all we're doing is looking at people or looking at our community for what it lacks. And then we insert ourselves as the people who can be the sole, fixers of that problem. Again, sometimes that compromises relationship and even creates sometimes a hierarchy of relationship where we are the providers of a service and we are, the ones to save or help a person. And then it puts those who are receiving said service as kind of the client. It creates that kind of client relationship, which again, isn't really about trust or relationship, which is really core and central for ABCD.
And it causes those folks receiving to be defined by what's wrong with them first. And so we want to flip that script if we can.
Yes. And then the third one we see often in churches is the role of program provider. And I grew up in a mega church, so this one makes a ton of sense to me. We were all about what program can we be? And the tension with ABCD that we see here is not that the programs are bad. Often, again, they are part of the assets of a community. However, sometimes churches feel this pressure and this need to be all the things to all the people. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of moves us to the possibility of what ABCD presents for us as church people, which is for the church to be a connector. And so instead of focusing so hard on getting people into the building for Sunday worship, what would it look like to get to know our actual literal neighbors, whether it be out in the community, around our actual church building, and just get to know them for the sake of knowing people, because that is an end in itself. Like relationship for the sake of relationship is an end itself. And we get to know more of who God has created, which is a joy and a gift. And then again, through those learning conversations, we're able to identify those hidden gifts. And then when we do that, when we actually intentionally shift our agenda to relationship building for the sake of relationship, often we see so many opportunities where, again, instead of being the service provider, what if we are connecting people with things already happening in our communities? We don't have to be all the things to everyone. Maybe we recognize as a church, we're really motivated by art and being creative. And so we also don't have to be the church that then is the bunco group. Maybe that's not our gift, but the church down the street might be. And if we've met someone who has a passion for bunco, we don't have to always be everything to everyone, but because we are seeing ourselves as a connector within the community, we can then connect individuals to opportunities, or even connect individuals to one another, which is when we start to see a mobilization of gifts. And we believe through these connections, whether they're big or small, our communities grow stronger when people are more connected, when people are less isolated, when people are able to live into how God has gifted them uniquely. That makes people, and then in turn communities, stronger. And so that is the opportunity that ABCD presents, is that the church could be a connector, but we might have to let go of some of the things we've always done in order to do that.
So as we end our little video, we wanted to challenge you to go out and to try some of these, putting some of these principles and tools into place in your church. At the Neighboring Movement, we've created several ways that we can help churches deliver these kind of ideas in their local congregations. You can check that out at neighboringmovement.org, or you can reach out to us if you have specific questions. We want to encourage you that this is not professional work. It's just work that anybody can do. We often frame it in the terms of go and try some mini experiments. We say they're mini because we start small. They're experiments because we don't know what the outcome will be. But what we know in the world of church, at least within our context in the United States, is that we need a lot of experimentation where we can try new things, try to become church in a different way. And ABCD gives us one of those experiments that will help us imagine what church could become. And so thank you for watching this video. Thank you from Maddie for sharing all of her wisdom. And again, check out more of our stuff at neighboringmovement.org. And until next time, folks, happy neighboring.
Happy neighboring.